Hey guys, how are we today? I hope we're all having a lovely day. For today's video, I thought I would sit down and have a chat about makeup collection size. I hate classifying it as a makeup collection, but at this stage I can't really think of another word that would fit as appropriately in this video. So with my past videos, I have sat down and done a full makeup inventory, including spreadsheets for everything that I have purchased and everything that I currently have in my drawers and on my vanity. And it was not long after I had done that I was thinking about things that I would like to change with everything that I have and I own, and I was thinking about the pros and cons of it, and I thought more about, you know, the pros and cons of having more makeup and beauty products, and, you know, the benefits and disadvantages of having a less amount of makeup. And although I'm not exactly happy with all of the makeup that I do have at the moment, hence why I'm doing a no-buy and a project pan, it does have its benefits, it does have its disadvantages. Sometimes I wish I had more, sometimes I wish I had a lot less. But, you know, there are pros and cons for everything, so I actually sat down and worked out a little pros and cons tallies for having more or less, and thought I'd kind of talk through my reasoning for, you know, everything that I have written. I have found that the tallies are kind of similar in size. So the pros for the small collection pretty much lines up with the cons for the large, and the vice versa. So the pros for the large lines up with the cons for the small. And there are only a couple of pros for having more makeup that I can find, but to me they are pretty important. And makeup is a fairly individual need or want, and to me this list is just what I feel the pros and cons would be. And, you know, the reasons that I would like to have more and the reasons that I would like to have less would be completely different to somebody else's reasons. And what I deem to be a small collection or a large collection would be different to what other people would have. So I look at a few people that, you know, they literally just have one makeup bag, and, you know, by makeup bag I mean like something that's about this big, that to me that would be what I would take maybe in my handbag. And other people that have, you know, entire rooms of makeup. Like, I know that in most cases that would generally only apply to YouTubers and influencers and beauty gurus, but there are a lot of other people out there that have quite a lot more than I do, and, you know, all their makeup takes up an entire wall of their room, and I would love to have that much makeup. I absolutely would, but I don't think I would ever get through all of it. So let's start with the small collection list, and then we can go from there. So one of the first pros that I do have for having a less amount of makeup is that it would take up less space. So not only would it take up less space in the drawers and the units that I do have, and the makeup bag and the palette holder that I have, and the, you know, the drawers and the containers and everything that I have, all of that costs money. So it costs money to have the vanity set up that I do have. I paid quite a lot of money for that. I paid quite a lot of money for all of the makeup bags that I have. I paid quite a lot of money for all of the drawers and the containers that I have my makeup sitting in within my vanity. So having a larger amount of makeup would mean that I would need to get more sets of drawers and more containers and dividers to put them all in. So it is one of the pros that I have found, that, you know, I have spent a lot of money. At the moment I'm happy with the setup that I do have. I would like to reorganize it again fairly shortly, but I'm certainly not in the need to go and buy any more containers or dividers to put them in. Another thing that I have found is a pro is that there is less money wasted on products that are not being used. So with, for example, the biggest sections of my makeup collection, all of the makeup that I do have, when I did my makeup inventory, it was highlighters and lip products. So at the moment I have 2 of these containers full of lip products, as well as a few smaller ones in my drawer. All of my highlighters do fit into this, and I know that they are all kind of crammed in at all different angles in there, so it is difficult to see them all. Like there are little ones stuffed down in here and in the back here. And I do sometimes look at it and think that's going to waste because I'm not using it. I love all of the highlighters that I do have. I love them all for very different reasons, and I swatched them all on my arm a few weeks ago, and they are all very different colours. There were a few that I thought were going to be very, very similar, but they're not. They are all different. I do have more than I think I will need in the next couple of years. I think that some of those are most likely going to go bad and expire before I get to them, which is disappointing because I have spent my hard-earned money on that. So having a smaller amount of makeup does lead to less wastage on products that expire and products that just sit there not being used. So for example, I only have one mascara and it's great. I am thinking about trying a different one, but you know, I've had it in the past where I've bought one as a backup and thought, right, I'll use that when this one expires. I've gone to use it and it turns out I don't like it. So I can completely understand where people are coming from, where they have an entire drawer full of mascara and it just sits there because they have one that they really like. And I'm like, that's great for them, but to me, I would think that that would be a waste of money. So having less in that term is definitely a pro for me, because there is less sitting there that is going to waste. Having a smaller amount of makeup does also give you the option to find out what you really like and what really works for you. So I have a few of those highlighters that I bought and I thought I'm absolutely going to love them. I'll use them every day. I use them once or twice and it's not really my thing. I've found that ones that I thought that I wouldn't like, that I swatched them on my arm, I'm like, oh, I'm not sure I'm going to like that. I'll give it a go anyway. They turn out to be the ones that I love the most. And it's really given me a bit of perspective in in finding what really works for me and then being able to focus more on those products. So not only focus on using them, but also when I go to buy a new one, I'll know exactly what kind I do prefer, and I'm more likely to buy one that's of a similar tone and shade and whatnot. It can also help in finding what type of products really work for you as well. So I have 2 liquid highlighters in there and they just don't work well on my skin. I have a fair amount of texture. I do have fairly large pores and they exaggerate that a lot. So with having those 2, one I think I got in a mystery pack and one I got in a Bella box. The Bella box one I got first, and I'm definitely glad that I'd never bought one prior to that, because that one really gave me some good examples of finding things that I don't like and that just don't suit me. So I will use them eventually. I'll find different ways to use them, and that leads me into this point, which is being able to find a way to work things, like to use things that may not be the more traditional way to use them. So I used to have an under eye powder. It was a physician's formula one, and using it with a brush just didn't work for me. It just made everything look cakey. But I did find that at that stage, I only had two powders. One was a loose powder, and then I had that pressed powder. But using it with a wet sponge, it was absolutely perfect. I don't know why, but it just worked. And, you know, using it with a dry brush just wasn't working for me. Using it with a dry sponge didn't really work either. But after I put my foundation and concealer on, I used the section of the sponge that I had used for those. And for some reason, it just seemed to melt everything all together. And it looked absolutely beautiful. I absolutely love it. So having less options gives you a way to, well, basically gives you the option to find ways to use products in a different way to make them work for you, which I really loved. So I'm sure that there are definitely more pros than that, but I just can't really think of any at the moment. So on to the cons, as well as finding ways to make products work for you in a way. One of the cons I have found is that we have less options. So I have only a few eyeshadow palettes. I can't remember how many. Let me just have a quick look. So I have 12 eyeshadow palettes, and I do tend to stick with the same color families and styles of palettes. So I did recently throw out, when I say recently, I mean towards the start of last year, throw out majority of my single eyeshadows because they had all expired. They were all over 10 years old and they just weren't working. When I had done that, I had lost pretty much every color that I have. So my options at the moment, even with all of the eyeshadow palettes that I bought last year that I absolutely love, I'm pretty much limited to neutrals, pinks, and there are a couple of palettes with a few pops of colour. But even then, so with my Revolution Big Big Love palette, this does have quite a lot of colour in it, but they're all pinks, purples, yellows, oranges, browns. And that's it. That is the majority of my collection. Hate that word, but yes, it is a collection. I've resigned myself to the fact that it is a collection. The only palette that is different is my Jaclyn Hill palette. But even then, it's majority neutrals, 2 or 3 greens, 1 purple, 1 blue. And the rest are neutrals, pinks and reds. So it has limited my options. I have, you know, 2 blue eyeshadows, 2 green eyeshadows, and that's about it. So if I wanted to do a specific look with any of those colours, if I wanted to do a rainbow look, I would have great difficulty. Actually, I've just remembered that I do have one rainbow palette, but it's a lot different to what I thought it was going to be when I first bought it, and I have barely used it. So just because it's not the exact type of colours that I would be looking for. I think that not having as much as I used to have has definitely cut back on my choices and my options for different looks. The other big drawback to having a smaller amount of makeup is not having many options if something doesn't work for you. So when I mentioned before that I had 2 powders and I had to find a way to make them work for me, I would have been left with no other options aside from using products that didn't work if I couldn't have found a way to make that powder work. It was pretty much either throw it out or use the other powder that I did have, or use that powder that made me look cakey, which no one wants that. No one wants to look bad. So it does make it hard when, say the same example with the mascara. I had thrown out the one that had expired and I was using one that I didn't like. That was it. That was my only option. I didn't have anything else there to use. So, you know, that's pretty much it. So on to the pros and cons for having a bigger selection of makeup and having, you know, more products, that the pro, as opposed to that con for having less, is that if I have something that doesn't work, then I don't have to use it. I can pick something else that does work. So I know I have a couple of lipsticks and a lip pencil that I'm not particularly a fan of. I don't like the way that they work. And the option that I do have, because I have other ones of those items, is I can just go and use something that I do have and that I do like. So I have quite a lot of lipsticks, and if I, you know, say don't like using one in particular, I don't have to use it. I can go and choose another one to use. On the flip side of that, being that I do have those options, if there's something that I don't like and don't want to use, it's either just going to sit there in the drawer being wasted until it expires or until it gets decluttered, which is still a waste of money. So having a bigger selection of makeup does give you more options. You get more choices of products that you can use. So with all of my highlighters that I did briefly show you there, if I have those two that I'm not particularly a fan of, or the cream highlighters that I have that I don't particularly want to use, if I'm trying to create a certain look and I know that those products aren't going to work for me, I have the option. I can choose something else that I do want to use and that I know will work and that I know will work well and it will create a good look with. So that is definitely a pro there. But the con on the flip side of that is that with those few that I'm not particularly fans of, they're just going to sit there and not be used, which is a waste of money. So on my previous videos, I have mentioned that I don't want for there to be things that are sitting there and being wasted, which is why I am doing a 20 in 2020 challenge. And I am looking at going into a rolling project pan after I have finished that. So once I've used those items that I do have in my basket at the moment, I'll be putting new items in there so that I can give them the option to find ways to make them work. So another pro of having more, as well as the giving you more options for product to use, it's giving you more options for the different looks. So with the eyeshadow palettes that I mentioned earlier, if I had different eyeshadow palettes, if I had more eyeshadow palettes, if I had a lot more singles that were not expired, then it would give me more options to create different looks. So on the flip side of that being a con is that I do tend to favor certain products. So the ones that, you know, if say I'm a big fan of this new little palette here and it's my absolute favorite, I'm not saying that it is, I love all of my palettes, some more than others. But just as an example, if that one is my favorite and I focus exclusively on that one, then everything else will pretty much just sit there not being used. So the more makeup you have, the more sits there not being used. And the more that sits there not being used, the higher chance of expiring and being wasted. I'm sorry, I'm trying to kind of work through the pros and cons, and we've just kind of gone on to the cons now, which I'm pretty sure I have mentioned a lot when I had discussed the pros of having less makeup and a smaller collection. Actually, I think that was pretty much it. The only thing I didn't really touch on, and I kind of did when I mentioned that the space issue with having less makeup. When you do have more makeup, you do need to find more creative ways to store it, you know, buying new furniture, new storage containers, and they are fairly expensive. Majority of the cons to do with having more makeup is mainly financial. You know, it costs money to buy the makeup. It costs money to store the makeup. The more makeup you have, the more you have actually spent on that makeup, and the less chance you have of actually using something with the more you have. So with the 12 eyeshadow palettes that I do have, I'm more likely to use all of those or majority of those than I am if I had, say, 100 eyeshadow palettes. If I had 100 eyeshadow palettes, I would probably use them all maybe once or twice, or, you know, just keep rolling through them as more palettes were making their way into the collection. Given that I have less there, I'm more likely to use those certain few. If I had more, I would probably still focus on those certain few, but all of the newer ones would be sitting there going unused. And, you know, some of these are fairly expensive. Some of them, you know, worked out to be about $4 or $5 a pan. I'm like, that's a lot of money to sit there being wasted. And still, those palettes that are more expensive are the ones, sorry, I've got the hiccups, the ones that you do use the most, you'd find that the ones that are cheaper would be sitting there going unused. But if you have, say, out of 100 palettes, 5 of those are really, really expensive palettes. So we're talking Natasha Denona, Pat McGrath, even Jeffree Star, I would find to be a little bit expensive for me at the moment. And this is all just me personally. I don't think that I will ever be able to afford any of those. So if I had, say, 5 really expensive palettes in, you know, out of those 100 palettes, and I wanted to use all of those up first because I didn't want that money to be wasted, you need to think about the cost of those 5 palettes versus the 95 cheap palettes that, yes, you might have only spent $10 or $15 or maybe $20 on each of those palettes. If they're all going unused, that's still an awful lot of money to be wasted there. So majority of the issues that I do have and that I do find to be a con with having more makeup, as I mentioned before, is financial. But to me, that is the main drawback with even having what I have at the moment. So because I've sat down and worked out how much everything is, and you know how much every single pan is worth and how much every single lipstick is worth, I know the total of everything that I have spent on all of this. I know the value of everything if I had to replace everything. If I was to go through and throw out or pass along makeup to somebody else, I know how much I have wasted on those products by throwing them out or passing them along to someone else. I recently gave my mum one of my lip liners, $18. So, you know, to me, that's $18 that I just gave away. I wouldn't say I'd throw it away, but if I had thrown it out, yes, I would have thrown it away. And, you know, there are cons and pros for having more and less amount of makeup. One of the pros that I do find of having a smaller amount, even though I wouldn't class what I have to be a small amount, I would say that it's, you know, a medium size. It's definitely not small, but it's definitely not big compared to what I have seen other people having. It's more than I'm comfortable with at the moment with my lifestyle, and this is the issue that I'm having with, you know, my makeup at the moment. And everybody is different. I'm sure that there's people out there that would look at what I have and go, oh, that's nothing. You have nothing. That's, you know, like 1/10 of my amount of makeup that I have. But there are other people that would come and look at what I have and go, oh my God, you have so much. How are you ever going to get through this all? I don't think I would be able to find anything to do with this makeup. You have too many options, too many choices. It's all individual, and that's one of the great things I love about makeup, is that it is all individual. Everyone can have their own choices, everyone has their own likes and dislikes, and it is one of the difficulties, which I forgot to add this on as a con for having a smaller amount of makeup, and in that stage for the large amount of makeup as well, is that no matter how much you have, and how much I have, I still find it difficult to choose out of everything that I have. I have 9 foundations, 9 or 8. I think I might actually, no, 7, because I used one last month. I only have 7 foundations at the moment, and I still have difficulty choosing which one to use. And maybe that's another con of having even more makeup than what I have, is that difficulty in which one do I choose? Which one do I choose? having my 20-20-20 challenge has been very beneficial in some ways, because it's limiting my choices in some areas. For, you know, if I have special occasions, yes, I use different makeup, but for my everyday use, I have a basket, and it's pretty much, majority of my options are in here. I live out of this basket. You know, everything that's in there I use on a day-to-day basis, because I am trying to get the use out of those products. So all makeup collections have their pros and cons. These are the ones that I've found and that I think would be pros and cons of having less or more makeup than what I have. As I mentioned, I consider what I have to be a medium size, so I don't feel that these necessarily apply with what I have at the moment. This is more of a, if I had a smaller amount than what I have, or if I had a larger amount than what I have at the moment. So let me know what you think. How do you feel about the size of your makeup collection? Do you have the same issues? Have you found any other issues? Please feel free to comment below. And until then, I'll talk to you later. Bye.